Hi students, talking about the respiratory system here. It's Mrs. Bowles, and I wanted to just give you a quick overview of the structures involved in the respiratory system so that you can get a handle on the anatomy and physiology of those structures, and then we'll talk more in depth about how lungs actually get air in my next segment. So generally, functions of the respiratory system. Got quite a few here. The average one you expect, the gas exchange, surface area between the air and the blood, bringing gas in, oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. Also the mechanics of moving air into and out of the lungs. And not only that, your respiratory system protects itself against the outside environment. We'll talk about that. Produces sounds like talking, singing, and all that good stuff, and participates in smell. Olfactory sense is your sense of smell. Now I ask you guys to go ahead and label. Let's talk about the various parts as we go through here. We've got the nasal conchae, which are folds in the nose. When you come in, the opening to the nose is called the external nares. And then as you come inside, this is your nasal cavity. And these folds are called the nasal conchae. The folds, their job is to trap invaders in their mucus. Also to warm the air, humidify the air, moisten it as it comes through your nose. So filtration from those invaders and warming the air. Then as the air makes its way along after the nose, nasal conchae or sinuses, it moves into what we call the pharynx. That's the place where your nose and your mouth meet. You're well aware of that already. Keep in mind this back tube is the esophagus. That's our food pipe. It's behind or posterior to our windpipe, our trachea. So this is the trachea here. At the top of the trachea are a series of folds called the larynx. The larynx is your voice box. Right above the larynx, or in that larynx area where the air comes in, that's how you make sounds, by the way. There are vocal cords, but in that area there's a circle. That circle area is called the glottis. The glottis isn't on this picture, but you should know it. And above the glottis is a flap of skin located right here called the epiglottis. The epiglottis closes to keep the glottis safe when we're eating. So when we eat and we swallow, deglutition, the food goes down the esophagus but does not go down the trachea. Okay, so this is the trachea. The trachea is a tube, a long tube with cartilage rings around it. So you see the blue here, those are the cartilage rings. Not to be confused with the esophagus, that is a flat, pretty much a flat tube, muscular, but not open all the time. The trachea is open all the time. That way we breathe, obviously, while we're sleeping, and we're not consciously controlling that, but it's open all the time. Now keep in mind your respiratory system pretty much at the point of right below the pharynx. We are delineating here between upper and lower respiratory. Okay? Now, the trachea branches into bronchi. Each one is called a bronchus, and the bronchi branch into what are called bronchioles. And at the very end, they continue to branch into the tinier ones. And at the very end, we have the alveoli, or the air sacs. We have about 500 million of those in our body that are the place where the capillaries are located and where gas exchange takes place. Notice here the diaphragm muscle. The diaphragm muscle is what helps us to breathe. We'll be talking more about that in our breathing mechanics conversations. Now, just a little bit more. I think I told you already, but this is just a quick zoom in to take a look at that airway we were talking about. Okay, air flows in. So here we have our nasal conchae, the mouth, the pharynx, which is where the mouth and the nose meet. Again, the esophagus on the back, the trachea on the front, the glottis being the opening, the larynx, those vocal cords that air passes through to make sounds, and the epiglottis, the flap of skin that protects it from food entering. That's right here. I just like this picture because I like you to be able to see this frontal section where you can view what we're talking about with the nasal conchae and the space or sinuses. This is an actual person. You can see the mouth here. You can also see the eyes and just basically the little spaces in our openings of sinuses within our face, in our cavities there. I wanted to talk just for a minute about the lungs. Okay, the lungs are pretty much right up against, and remember this whole environment is moist, they're right up against the diaphragm muscle, and they pretty much take the shape of the thoracic cavity. All right, they're very soft and pliable. But something that you need to know is that the right lung and the left lung are not the same. Okay, the right lung is larger, it has 3 lobes, actually it's wider, but shorter. The liver is right below it, so the liver displaces this lung a little bit upward. And the left lung, on the other hand, has only 2 lobes, but it is displaced by the heart, forming the cardiac notch. Okay? Just a little something here about males and females and your lung size or capacity. It's a little different for males and for females. I like this cutting. This is a transverse section. I like this because you can see that here is the heart, and you see the various chambers here. And then these are your 2 lungs. Also, they're letting you see the spinal cord, so the sternum here. So you can see from this section being removed, this side is actually the right, and this side is the left as it's being pulled out. And so you can see that the heart is slightly left of center, if you're looking at this correctly, and the lungs are filling the cavity around it. We often talk about our respiratory system and starting with the trachea as the bronchial tree. The bronchial tree represents the trachea, the bronchi, the bronchioles, and all of those little tiny air sacs. You see them here. This is where each of those pieces of the bronchial tree terminate or end in a big circle called an air sac or alveoli. And those are where the capillaries are wrapped around them, and so that's how the gas exchange takes place. I wanted you to see this, being that it's called the bronchial tree. If you turn it upside down, you can kind of visualize why they gave it that name. And lastly, I wanted to talk just for a couple seconds after we finish this about how our respiratory system protects itself. But here are you being able to see a little bit closer the alveoli. Alveolus is a singular term. And here, in a second, I'll show you, but you can see these specialized cells called alveolar macrophages. They're basically patrolling each alveolus, and they're engulfing invaders that they might find. So that's a protective mechanism. And that's pretty much what I'm going to tell you on this last part here. They are patrolled by alveolar macrophages. And in addition to that, there are 4 components. One of those is the alveolar macrophages that actually give us a defense. Our respiratory system defends us. One is goblet cells. These are mucus-producing cells, and they basically wet everything down such that if something floating comes in, like pollen, into our nose or our throat, it basically gets trapped in the mucus, brought to the back of our throat by these wonderful cilia. You can see them here on this electron micrograph. And that sweeps the debris. Those cilia move everything from down in our bronchial tree up to the back of our throat. And that basically gets trapped. I like to call it the mucus escalator. It gets trapped, and it basically, when we cough and sneeze, that's what comes out to rid our body of those. Keep in mind filtration, which is happening in our nasal cavity, removing large particles. And of course, the alveolar macrophages I was talking about, which are engulfers of invaders. And if something does reach the lungs and is not trapped by the cilia or the mucus, that's when the macrophages come in and swallow it up. And that's about all I have for right now. We'll talk more later. Have a great day.